Everyone, my name is Edward Freeland. I'm the Executive Director of the Data-Driven Social Science Initiative here at Princeton University. Today, I want to show you some results from a survey experiment we carried out just about a year ago today. The idea for this experiment grew out of two essays that were published in the Journal of Democracy by Roberto Foa and Yasha Monk, first in 2016 and then in 2017. Those essays received a lot of attention in academia and in the popular press. In these two essays, Foa and Monk argue that public opinion data from the World Values Survey and other sources have been flashing early warning signs that a growing number of people around the world no longer believe that democracy is the best possible form of government. They argue that along with this declining confidence in democracy, the data show an increasing openness to alternative forms of government, such as authoritarianism and rule by the military. Their work has led to a larger debate in which some have argued that these concerns are overblown and not consistent with other indicators that democracy has become firmly established throughout much of the world, despite the rise of right-wing populism in the US and Europe. Alexander and Belzel, for example, claim that the trends that are alarming some democratic theorists are merely a few bumps in the road on the way to a much brighter future that we will see in the coming decades for the institutions of liberal democracy. One of the trends in the WVS data that Foa and Monk point to in support of their democratic deconsolidation thesis is a growing proportion of people who say that having a democratic political system is a bad or very bad way to run their country. This chart from one of their papers shows how much those proportions have increased among different age groups from 1995 to 2011. What's troubling here is that proportions in the US and Europe have increased for nearly all age groups, with the largest increases among younger people in their 20s and 30s. And in case you are wondering what the newest wave of the WVS shows, I've overlaid the 2017 data here so we can see it's gone back down for 3 age groups in the US, but the proportions for people aged 25 to 34 is still higher than it was in 1995, and the proportion for people 16 to 24 has gone even higher since 2011. All of that led me to wonder how well people understand the WVS questions about democracy and its alternatives. I suspect that some of what might be going on is a visceral reaction among conservatives to the phrase democratic political system, which in our polarized political environment might be interpreted by some respondents as rule by the Democratic Party. I was also curious about what effect we might see from changing the wording of questions about other forms of government, namely authoritarianism and military rule. What we found is that asking about democracy rather than a democratic political system that is shifting from an adjective to a noun is significantly associated with more positive views of democracy. To carry out this experiment, we used the national US panel from CINT. We conducted online interviews with a total of 2,505 panelists in early November 2020. The sample was randomized so that half the respondents were presented with the standard WVS questions, Q235 through 239, for those of you who know that data, while the other half were presented with our experimental versions of the same questions. Before the analysis, we added a set of ranking weights based on the 2019 ACS and the vote tallies so we can adjust to population parameters for age, sex, Hispanic ethnicity, race, education, and whether and for whom you voted in the presidential election. This latter adjustment is important because, as we saw in the 2020 pre-election polls, there appears to have been a consistent underrepresentation of Republican voters. The WVS question goes like this. There are various types of political systems in the world today. Please tell us what you think about each as a way of governing this country. For each one, would you say it is a very good, fairly bad, or very bad way of governing this country? On the issue of authoritarian rule, the WVS question asks about a strong leader who does not have to bother with Congress and elections. As an alternative, we asked about a powerful leader who is not accountable to anybody. This version is associated with a shift of about 14 percentage points away from a favorable view of authoritarian leaders. We also found that we were very close to matching the proportion that was found in the 2017 WVS data. We found a slightly smaller but significant reduction in support for military rule with our alternative version of the question, although our alternative version was closer to the result in the 2017 WVS response. For the question on democratic rule, we flipped to the proportion of people who say it is a very bad or fairly bad way to run the country. Note that we find a 6% shift in response, and that our version is also, and that version is also closer to the WVS version, of the WVS outcome for the other version. So who's reacting to this change in the wording? Our hypothesis is that it's people who are members of the Republican Party or who lean Republican who may have a visceral reaction to the phrase democratic political system. To test this idea, we can run a multivariate model of support for democracy in Group A, which got the WVS version of the question, and Group B, which got the alternative version of the question, and look at the independent effect of being Republican to see whether it matters and whether its impact is different depending on which version of the question is asked. So our dependent variable has a small number of ordinal categories, and we used ordered logit and ordered probit regression to test the model. We find that the coefficient associated with being Republican is negative and significant among people presented with the WVS version, but it is not significant in the alternative version of the model. The control variables remain relatively stable in their effects across the two probit models and the two logit models. So unlike being Republican, their impact appears to be relatively unaffected by the change in wording. So in conclusion, we find that asking about democracy in the noun form gets a different reaction than asking about a democratic political system in the adjective form. Moreover, the shift in support is not random and may be evidence of a visceral reaction that Republicans have to the phrase democratic political system. That means we have to be cautious in interpreting trends in the WVS data as signs of democratic deconsolidation. This certainly does not disprove FOA and Monk's ideas about democratic deconsolidation, but it suggests that polarization may be muddying the waters. I'll also mention that among the control variables, the model showed that being a non-voter has the strongest association with negative views of democracy, regardless of which version of the question is asked. On the other hand, age and education were strongly associated with positive views in both versions of the question. One final note is the impact of adding vote outcome as one of the ranking weights. Non-voters turned out to be the most underrepresented group in my sample, so adding vote behavior as a weight variable may be a significant factor in inflating or reducing some of our estimates. I'm happy to talk about this more with anyone who's interested. Detailed output from the 4 regression models is here on the last few pages, and the slides are available here at this address. Thank you.